That intro is always longer than I think it is. It's always like, oh, it's only like, minute and a half. No, that's a full 2 minutes, but I love it. So anyway, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, and welcome to Explain Like I'm 5. Usually this is the point where I try and explain what the hell this show is, but I'm still trying to figure that out myself. So I am Susan, as y'all are probably aware of by now. And with me today, I have the fantastic Noah Lugeons. Noah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here. It's a insurrection-y kind of week, so I'm glad everything worked out that we could be together.
Yeah. Considering the giant clusterfuck that has been this last week, I would say things could be worse, but I really don't want to tempt fate at that point. Really don't. But
yeah, I mean, there's so many ways they could be worse, though. The people we were against could not be idiots, right? Like, I mean, I don't want to give them ideas, but,
you would, yeah. You would think that at some point they would have thought about, maybe this isn't such a good idea, like everything that we're doing. It's like that gif, are we the baddies? Like,
yeah.
But I don't think that's crossed their mind yet.
What? You'd think at some point they would have thought about what they were gonna do. What was the point? Right? Like I said this on Facebook earlier, but like what a perfect analogy for the entire Trump administration. A bunch of white supremacists storm their way into the heart of the federal government, have no idea what to do once they're there, have no way to accomplish anything. So they just steal some shit, break some shit, get some people killed, get forced out way later than they should have been forced out, and then don't get punished sufficiently for the crime afterwards. I'm guessing on that last one, but
Yeah, it's kind of par for the course at this point. It's almost like stuff like that has happened before. So, and yeah, Maya's like, clusterfuck is just a mild word for what happened this week. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have strong enough words, I don't think.
No,
we've never needed them before in our defense.
Yeah, we need to go into a totally different language.
We need Shakespeare just to start making shit up on the fly, right?
Yes. Come on, don't do that to me right now. So as many of y'all who watch this on a regular basis know, I have a cat in my lap who's always there, and she always decides at the very last minute, I'm gonna shift. So you're stuck on all of your cables and wires and stuff. So yeah, so in our discussion on, whenever I asked you to be on the show, you're like, I'm not really sure what I would talk about. And then you were like, well, I can talk about this. And I was like, this is perfect. Because so I'll let you introduce everything, but once you do, I sort of want to continue on with that stuff. So what are we talking about today?
Right. So when you contacted me at first, you said, I want to talk to you about something other than atheism. And I'm like, okay, that's new, right? That's the only thing I ever get invited. I get invited to talk about Christian movies. I get invited to talk about how we're all going to die in a Orwellian theocracy of some sort. I know that's kind of like moving in two directions there, but and I'm just like, okay, what else do I know about? And I know I'm one of those people that knows a little bit about a lot of stuff, but not enough to fill a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Except I happen to be weirdly obsessed with early video game history.
Yes.
And so I suggested that one, and you seemed pretty stoked about it.
Mm-hmm. So I'm very stoked because I have had people come on, like, I think I told you, like, Don Ford came and talked about, like, genetics. Like, talked a full hour. He did Punnett squares and everything. Great.
I bet he did.
Like, it was just fantastic. Heath talked about like
I wanted to have
Buddhism like stuff.
Please tell me he had a voice for recessive allele or something like that.
That would have been amazing. Why did I not ask him to do that?
I can now just barely see the feet of a corgi under that screen right behind you there. I can just barely see them. They're so damn cute. Corgis are the best dogs.
They are good dogs. So that particular one is Benny. Benny has a tail.
Oh, nice.
Benny is a corgi with a tail. Usually their tails get docked, but Benny has a tail. So he's
awesome.
He's a good boy.
I'm not a big fan of docking tails and stuff.
Yeah, I can't abide that. I just can't. So, the reason I was so excited was because this was around the time that in one of the outtakes, I think it was on Scathing, he was like, oh no, because and someone was like, what? You're like, oh, I have a bit of Atari trivia, but nobody wants to hear it. And I was like, I want to hear it. Like, I totally want to hear this. So I'm very, very excited. So start us off.
Right. Okay. So yeah, then where does the history of video games begin? I guess is the right place to start. And of course, like any interesting topic, there's no short answer. There are a bunch of different contenders for the first video game. I think honestly the best contender is in 1952, a fellow by the name of Alexander Shafto Douglas.
Mhm.
He was a British guy. He was a student postgrad at Cambridge, and he made a version of tic-tac-toe that you could play with a computer, like it actually had a computer opponent.
Oh, no.
So this was like the first time, and there was a checkers game that was made around the same time, and so there's some argument as to which of those two came first. I think most people agree that the Noughts and Crosses game came first. It was only built as a, as part of his doctoral thesis. It was like, hey, look, here's an algorithm that can play a perfect game of tic-tac-toe. It wasn't something that was available to the public. It wasn't something anyone else was allowed to play. It was built using equipment that had to like almost immediately be disassembled and used for other stuff because it was crazy expensive. But that was kind of the first time in that I'm aware of anyway, that there was a computer game, like a game that was played on a computer that had a visual component.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, I don't think it had a video component. I think it just had like lights, like little, basically, the equivalent of LEDs that lit up to make X's and O's. But it was like, for all intents and purposes, a video game. Most of the histories I see will go a little bit later than that to 1958 and say that the first video game was made by Willie Higginbotham in 1958 at the Brookhaven Laboratory in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a similar thing, right? This was it was a facility that did a lot of nuclear research, and of course, this is height of the Cold War. Everybody's terrified of nukes, so every year this company would do a week where it's like, everybody in the community come and see what we're doing. They had like a particle collider at the time, and people were terrified of that. Like, it's a nuclear cannon. They're like, no, it's not a nuclear cannon, man. But I mean, if you look at the way people react to the LHC even now, you can see,
Yeah, like the basic understanding of that general device has not really expanded.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, right. And so, they weren't afraid. Well, I mean, the fear has gotten way more sophisticated. They weren't afraid it was going to make black holes or anything. They were afraid of a mushroom cloud. But yeah, so once a year, they would invite the people in the community in to see what they were doing and see that it's not terrifying. So Willie Higginbotham had the idea of, hey, why don't we take some of this high-tech equipment and make a little game that people can play while we have this week-long thing. And so he made a game. Him and another guy an engineer by the name of Robert Dvorak made a game called Tennis for Two.
Mm-hmm.
And this is usually listed as the first video game. And I really, honestly, I have no idea why people go here instead of the Noughts and Crosses game. It makes very little sense to me. There are like technical arguments about, this one has real-time input and whatever. But the Tennis for Two, it's amazing because there are photographs of this thing. Like the Noughts and Crosses, it was taken apart immediately afterwards because the equipment was way too expensive to devote to a video game. But it is, if you look at these photographs, it's played on this tiny little oscilloscope, right? Maybe 5 inches across, maybe a little bit bigger than that. And it's connected to these two like refrigerator-sized computers and another thing that looks like an old-timey gas pump. And there's like wires running between them that are so big you could barely put your hand around them. And there's all of this incredibly large amounts of computer equipment going into this tiny little screen. And the entire game, apologies, there might be a siren in the background that's audible. The entire game, there's a ball bouncing. Imagine like a side-on view of a game of tennis. Mm-hmm. You've got one line along the bottom. There's a ball that can bounce along that, and there's a little tiny net. in the middle. The only thing on the screen is that and a ball that's bouncing back and forth. The only interaction that you have as the player is you can hit a button. When you hit the button, the game acts as though you've hit the ball and it hits it back across. It doesn't score anything. You have to tell, oh, mine hit the net, or, okay, so you've got a point or whatever. You got to keep score on your own. Mm-hmm. That's all the interaction you have. You don't have a visible paddle or anything. That's it. And like the Noughts and Crosses thing, unlike the Noughts and Crosses thing, it was available to the public. People could come in and look at it, but only if you lived in whatever, Upton, New York, or wherever the hell Brookhaven Laboratory was.
Right.
So very, very few people were able to play it. It wasn't a commercial product. So a lot of people say, yeah, there's your first video game right there. But it still basically doesn't count. My vote for first video game would go to Steve Russell's Space War, which was built with a PDP-1, which was they called it a microcomputer at the time. Again, it's the size of 2 refrigerators and everything.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But it's the first of these that like virtually anybody would look at and say, okay, well, that's obviously a video game, right? Mm-hmm. It was 2 little spaceships that flew around trying to shoot at each other. There was no AI. It was player versus player. Mm-hmm. But you had a little spaceship that you could accelerate, and you had to take into account that, like, you would maintain momentum and stuff. You moved around like you did in Asteroids.
Uh-huh.
And 2 players would just try to shoot at each other. Pardon me. And this was it was a super popular thing, right? It was made at MIT in 1962, and it was so popular that the company that made the PDP-1, the computer that it was programmed on, started including it as a demonstration. Right. So if you get our computer, you'll be able, this is how good this computer is. It can do stuff like this. Now, they were selling these to big universities and governments and stuff. They weren't selling them to individuals, but it was a great visual demonstration of, look at how much math this thing's able to do in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it became a real fad as the PDP-1 became more and more popular on college campuses. The engineering students, the computer students saw this thing. And that really is kind of where video games were born. Again, this was never commercialized, or actually years and years and years later, after the video game industry was a thing, somebody tried to make exactly this game and try to commercialize it. But it wasn't commercialized at the time because the computer that ran it, again, cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, there's no way, even if you had one computer running 10 of these games or something, there's no way you could make enough money on quarters to make this viable.
Yeah, it's like that's a lot of quarters. You just have to pump them in there constantly, and it's yeah.
So the first commercial video game, with like the one that actually started the industry, I think is kind of the more interesting question, and that is again, there's a dispute, right? Everything in this industry is disputed. That's either Ralph Baer, who was a German Jew that escaped right before World War II, if I'm not mistaken, and immigrated to the U.S. as a kid, mm-hmm. Became an engineer, and he was working for a company called, he's a veteran, he was a badass dude, he was working for a company called Sanders that was a military contractor, and he had this idea for TV games. This company was like, yeah, there's probably some money in the patent for that. So they gave him a bunch of money and a group of people to work on it. He worked on it in secret for a very long time, for like 6-7 years, before he came up with what was called Bear's Brown Box. That's what it's kind of known to as history in history. That was eventually licensed to Magnavox, who turned it into the Magnavox Odyssey, which was the first TV game that was sold for to be used in the homes. Wasn't super popular. They sold, I think, like almost 250,000 units. So it was, in like a 3-year period. But it was nowhere near as popular as a game that came out the year before, which is the one that most people think of when they think of the first video game, and that's Pong. Mm-hmm. So Pong, interestingly enough, was a complete and total ripoff of one of the games that Bear's Brown Box played. So while Ralph Baer and Sanders are trying to sell this idea, they're taking it to trade shows and shit, and they're showing it to the industry bigwigs. At the time, this guy, Nolan Bushnell, works for a company called Nutting and Associates, which is a company that makes quiz games and electromechanical games for arcades and things like that, right? Mm-hmm. So he's a representative of this company, and he goes to see this demonstration at a trade show. He has to sign in and everything, right? So we know for a fact that he was in here, and he saw them playing a game and was allowed to play himself a game that was almost identical to Pong, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, to his credit, Pong was not his first video game. A year earlier, he had come up with the first video game that was ever commercially available, predated the Bears Brown box, beat it to the market by a year, and that was called Computer Space, which was basically just Steve Russell's Space War, but made without using a $300,000 computer.
Yeah, something a little more accessible.
Exactly. Now he figured out, him and another guy by the name of Ted Dabney figured out how to make that game work without using a microprocessor, without actually using a computer. They did it just in transistors. So they put this out into the universe, and it didn't sell very well because it was complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Space War was made for engineering students and physics students and computer students and stuff. These were people who understood things like, like the kind of momentum and movements that would be required in space and shit like that, and reverse thrusters and all this crap. Right. The average guy at a bar who just slapped a quarter into something while he's drunk doesn't want to think about this shit.
No.
So that game wasn't super popular. Unfortunately for Bushnell, though, he had started a company to make the damn thing, more or less, and he needed to make this work. So he's got this engineer he hired. He turns to this engineer. He's like, I want something so simple that any drunk can play. And the engineer, a fellow by the name of Al Alcorn, says, okay, so what do you have in mind? And he describes exactly this cool little tennis game that he just played on Bears Brown box. What would eventually become the Magnavox Odyssey. He doesn't tell Alcorn that that's where he got the idea. He's like, oh, I just, came up with in my own head all by myself this idea. So, right. Well, now he gets the shit suit out of him over this, and Bear ends up making millions of dollars. Basically, Ralph Baer goes out and sues everyone who ever makes a video game for all of history until he dies. But the cool thing that happened, though, is that along the way, Al Alcorn, the engineer that's handed this job, makes a game that's 1,000 times better than the game that Ralph Baer made. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, I could go into some of the details on it. There's a lot of subtle details to it, but things like the rallies get faster in Pong. Right. And I think it's at the 7th and 11th bounces, everything speeds up. So when you have a long rally going, things get really exciting, intense. The pongs, the sound effects come quicker and quicker. Ralph Baer's game didn't have sound effects. That little pong sound makes such a difference to the game. It makes it so much more attractive. Yeah. And the most important thing is that it was much simpler. In Ralph Baer's version of this, that you could move the thing up, you can move your paddle up and down or backwards and forwards. You can move into the forward court or the back court. And there was a third knob that would put English on the ball after you hit it so that you could do weird angles and stuff like that. That was complicated. I mean, it's not, compared to people who, we've got video game controls with 17 buttons on them, and those buttons are used in combinations. So that doesn't seem complicated to us now, but to somebody who'd never encountered a video game, that was a lot to keep track of.
Right.
So what Alcorn made was he segmented the paddle, first of all, that you're using. So if it hits towards the top of the paddle, it's got a more obtuse angle. If it hits in the middle, it's got a more acute angle. And he sped things up, and he added sound effects. He added scoring. There was no scoring on the original version. He made a really playable game. Now, the official story is, and of course, who the hell knows what the truth is? A lot of this came out in court, and a lot of this came out through lawyers and stuff. The official story is that Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari, he had no intention of this game, this paddle game, being a commercial product. He was using it to kind of teach Al Alcorn how to program a game, right? To make sure that this engineer knew his shit. He wanted to put him on a video driving game. Right. But he wanted to make sure he understood the basics of it. But once he saw what was made, he's like, this is so goddamn much fun. We have to try this. Mm-hmm. Now, again, I don't know if that's true or not. That might have been a cover your ass. I just ripped off his idea, but I didn't plan to use it. But then he came up with something so original and different, whatever. So Um, one way or the other. What we do know, though, is that they took this game out. They put it on a route. They already had a few different electromechanical games and pinball machines and stuff like that. Well, I guess a pinball machine is an electromechanical game, but so they had a bunch of other games that they had with a vending service with their company already. That's sort of where they got their cash flow. So they put this out in one of the places that already had their computer space machine. This bar called Andy Caps, which is famous apparently in Silicon Valley, largely because of this story. And it was an immediate hit, right? All the instructions, instead of all this stuff about physics and about you had 5 buttons that you had to work with on the old computer space game. Instead of all this crap, it just said, avoid missing ball to get high score. That's all the instructions that the game had. That was plenty. People could figure that out right away. The game made buku money, made so much more money than pinball machines or than their earlier video game or than any other coin-operated machine on their route. So basically, immediately they go into full production with this thing. And that was I think that's the genesis of the computer industry or the video game industry, right? Like everything can be traced back to that. That was the first time that a video game was not created, but commercially successful to the point where a lot of people actually had an opportunity to play it. So it's usually thought of as the first video game, even though it was nowhere, but by no measure was it the first video game. It wasn't even the first video game of its type, right?
Yeah. And the fact that they made it kind of idiot proof, especially in the instructions, had a lot to do with that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I think it's funny because the entire history of video games is watching video companies relearn that lesson over and over and over again. They make the games too complicated, so they narrow the appeal to a very small audience. And then somebody comes along and they're like, Farmville, and they make a gazillion dollars, right?
Exactly. Or you have something that's just I don't know, Halo, which if you're not getting too into it, it's just all here, let me, move forward, shoot grunts, and that's
right.
the extent of it.
Absolutely. Right. But then you've got, and again, you've got one company that's going to more and more complicated, and then Nintendo will come out and be like, yeah, but what if you just moved your hand like you were bowling? And they're like, oh, that's a gazillion-dollar idea, So
should have done that forever ago. And then it's yeah, you coulda.
Right. Yeah. So, but I find that so fascinating that was the very first lesson of video games. And you can still today watch video game companies making that same mistake over and over again.
So. Yeah. Oh, that's so funny. And you just so I'm not much of a gamer. We play a lot of Ark. We're kind of obsessed with Ark right now. And as much as I will shit on Halo, I enjoy playing Halo a great deal. We just bought and downloaded the Master Chief Collection, so we're gonna play that soon. And I've got a Halo Xbox, so
nice.
I like Halo. But hearing, especially when you're thinking about where all of these origins of where everything comes from, and then you see what it's turned into today. You've got stuff that and VR. Oh my god, so much VR stuff.
Yeah,
that fascinates me, and I also can't use it because I have really terrible eyesight. So it just doesn't quite work for me. But because you've got the Oculus, so how much of a difference is that or how with regular gameplay? I know this is totally Wii, but still that's always what happens with the show is Wii. But I'm always curious because I can't tell really how it's supposed to work. How the fuck do those things work?
Yeah, well, so I should say I don't know, right? I don't understand the tech even behind how the damn Atari works. So I certainly don't know how the Oculus works. But it is so fascinating. That's why I'm fascinated by this history, right? Because I'm old enough. I was born in 1976, which is the year before the Atari 2600 came out. So I've been alive through basically all of the relevant history of video games, and I've watched video games go from very simple, you're a square, pretend that's a knight, and pretend that this arrow is a sword, and pretend that treble clef chicken is a dragon. I've been there since then, and now I actually walk around in fully realized 3-dimensional worlds, and I help R2D2 and C3PO take out bad guys that are fucking with the rebellion. Terrible game, by the way. There's a I can't remember the name of it, but the recent Star Wars game for Oculus is not worth picking up.
Not really that great.
No,
and
no.
I don't know if you can see all of those back there. Those are all Star Wars Funko Pops.
Oh, nice.
So
Awesome.
I'm a really big Star Wars fan, so it's good to know that there's something I should avoid.
Yeah, well, there is a very good Star Wars thing for the Oculus, the thing that came out last year. I can't recall the name of it now, but it's like a 3-part. Oh, Vader Immortal. So there's a 3-part series called Vader Immortal that's very, very cool and is in VR, but the follow-up to it wasn't very. Galaxy's Edge, I think, Tales from the Galaxy's Edge, was
having to do with the Disney stuff.
Yeah, was not particularly impressive. It's kind of cool to be like, hey, that's R2D2. He's standing here. I can pat him on the head. That's kind of cool. But other than that, it's not particularly good.
Not really worth it.
But I will say, so if you're like a hardcore gamer, VR in this state that it is in right now is going to disappoint you, because you're going to feel like you're playing mini games, right? They don't have the ability to put fully realized video games, or what you and I would consider a fully realized game. You can't do VR Halo yet, right? Yeah, right. Because that's what. But the thing is that we're so tantalizingly close, right? So all the elements are there. My favorite video game of all time. I'm a huge retro gamer. I love retro games. I'm not going to argue that they're better than modern games. That's silly. My favorite video game of all time is the 2017 Game of the Year, Breath of the Wild, latest Legend of Zelda game. And all the various elements of that game are in games I've played in VR. Right? Like there's cool sword combat in some of the games I've played. There's very cool climbing in some of there's a game, VR game called The Climb, where you're just doing rock climbing and stuff like that. There's some very cool bow and arrow games. There's a game called In Death Unchained that I absolutely love. That's an archery based game. There are plenty of puzzle type games and exploration games. There's a game called Population 1 that has a flight system that is very similar to the Legend of Zelda, the hang glider system that they use for that, or jumping into a game of Fortnite or whatever. So you can see that once all of these elements are combined, you're going to have the fully realized games of today in VR, and that seems like it'll be a ton of fun. There are still a couple of big problems with VR. One is the locomotion problem. Right? You can't walk around in the VR world because you just walk into a wall, and they haven't really solved that. And it can be very sickening to walk around in a world when you're not actually moving. If you get motion sickness at all, it can be a little bit troublesome. Now, they have done some really good things to counteract that, what they call vignetting, that actually works very well to reduce that, but it also reduces the immersive effect of the game.
Right, yeah. So you said the Breath of the Wild was your favorite game ever.
Oh, yeah.
Are you... and I know you had said, I'm sure this gets really annoying when someone's all like, "Oh, you said on scathing," or "You said on gam."
Oh, no,
so sorry. But I know you got the the retro painted Switch for Christmas.
Yes.
What? So other than Breath of the Wild, like on other like consoles and PC or whatever else that you play on, what are some of your other favorite games that you have just been like played the shit out of?
All right, so right now the game that I'm obsessed with is a game called Hades that's on PC and Switch, and it was. A lot of people think it was like kind of cheated out of a lot of the Game of the Year awards. It's a phenomenally fun game, and I've just kind of gotten crazy obsessed with that one. But in terms of game, like honestly, so I should admit, I'm also not a gamer, right? Like gamers would not claim me. I am a person who has been playing a video game on my phone while listening to an audiobook about video game history while downloading a video game on my Xbox, and people like gamers still would not claim me. Because
sort of like turn up their nose and they're like,
right, no, because I'm a casual gamer. I'm just a hardcore casual gamer is all. So I play a ton of I think if I was to add up the number of hours I've on every game, whatever, the game that would come out on top, the game I've spent the most hours playing in my life is probably Candy Crush. Right? I've been playing that game for every bowel movement for 7 damn years. That adds up.
Yeah, and it's I think it's the appeal of like the level advancing.
That's a
Like,
lot
'cause
of it.
there's so many levels. It's that like dopamine hit of being all like, "Oh, I passed it. Fuck yes." Like, you're
Yes,
just so
it's
excited.
endless, and for all I know, they started cycling back over way back on like level 14 and 20 was the same as level 1, and I just haven't noticed this entire time. Who the hell even knows? But the other thing that I love about that game in particular is that it is almost entirely mindless. So
Mhm.
I can play that game while listening to a podcast and still get the entire podcast. I'm matching colors. I'm not trying to find words. I'm not trying to arrange letters. I'm not trying to do puzzles. There's no time limit. There's no falling blocks. There's no bad guys coming at me. If I need to set it down, or if I need to just stop paying attention to the game and start paying attention to what I'm listening to, I can do that.
Mhm.
Right? So it's this perfectly mindless game to me that still feels like there's just enough going on there that I feel like I'm doing something, I'm
Mhm.
accomplishing something, like you said. But I think that's a really interesting aspect of the history of video games, right? Is watching video game makers like sort of perfect addiction,
Oh,
right? They've made this what was the term? I heard the term the other day and I absolutely loved it, and now I'm losing track of it, but it was a term for a addictive technology for what was it? I've completely lost it. But pharmatronic was the term.
Mhm.
So pharmatronic quality, that ability to like, find exactly the reward centers that you have to hit, how often you have to hit them, how difficult does the level have to be for you to
Right.
not give up, but still feel like you've done something at the end. And the way that video games have allowed researchers to really hone in on that shit and to really study the way people learn and things like that. And the way that people motivate each other, right? Sort of the gamification of motivation, I think, is one of the most fascinating aspects of video game history.
Yeah, and it's like um I think the what are you doing now? You weird ass cat.
You are so lucky to have a lap cat like that. I have 4 cats and none of them are lap cats. So
Really?
yeah.
Aw, but
Well,
they're
I
so
have
cute, but
one
they're so
that'll
fluffy.
yeah, I have one big giant one that'll climb up on my lap at the end of the day if I like sit back in the recliner and lean back, but none of them that'll like stay there like that a long
Yeah.
term. I used to have one
She
that did that, little Siamese that did that, but
Oh, my nana always had Siamese cats, so I think that's where my, like, cat lady stuff started, and, so my cat is 14 now, and I
mhm.
adopted about a decade ago, so I'm just like, "You're you're you're so cute," and
See, I've got
feeding her senior food and just like, "Oh."
yeah, I've got 2 15-year-olds and then 2 2-year-olds.
Yeah, I was
So
like, it wouldn't
a
terrible.
year and a
Oh
half old.
god, I was gonna say, "Oh god, it has already been that long, hasn't
Yeah, yeah, a year and a half.
it?" But they're so fluffy.
Yeah.
Which, yeah. But yeah, so I think the my favorite thing, like, about yeah, and I think this is probably, like, everybody's favorite thing is that feeling of accomplishment, like, when you're like, "Okay, like, I'm done with this level," like and I found, um because the Master Chief Collection with Halo has, like, all of the different Halo games, so it's, like, every single one of them. So the very first Halo game I played all the way through was ODST. Was the one I think it came out in, like, 2008 or 2009 or something,
Okay.
and like there's much more, and I think this is what made it my favorite one, so, of all of them really, was the fact that there's so much more, like, you know, accomplishments and achievements and stuff that you have throughout that game, so much more so than the other ones. And it's like, what it's just hitting all the right things.
Mhm.
So it's like I love this so much. Can't
Well,
help it.
and what they do is they time it out just perfectly. So early on in the games, you're just getting accomplishments left and right, but then they become more and more sparse just as you're starting to realize how important they are,
Mhm.
that exponential growth of necessity that they figured out and everything. But I find, like, and one of the really interesting aspects of that too is how it differs from one culture to another. Right? Like, so anytime a game is moved from one nation to another, they localize it. And of course, sometimes that's changing the language or changing the references in it, or very often, if it's coming out of Japan or coming to the US, making it less racist. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
you think, attuning it to the sensibilities of the group that it's coming into, but also to the difficulty level, right?
Mhm.
Like, famously, Japanese versions of video games are way harder than their American counterparts because American kids will just get bored and move on to another thing
Mhm.
far more often. It's a cultural something that's culturally specific, and it changes all over the world. So the same game, it might even be played in the same language in two different countries, but might be a vastly different game because of either the cultural sensibilities or because of how difficult that country likes their games on average.
That makes sense. That
Mhm.
that makes a lot of sense because I think I heard that with like I know I think they did that with StarCraft. Like I feel like they did because I know StarCraft is still especially popular. Um, I think in Japan. I'm wanting to say in Japan.
It's definitely
Probably
super popular in Korea. I know it's
Korea. There
huge in
we go.
Korea.
Yeah, yeah. Um, where it's even God, and how long has it been since StarCraft came out?
Yeah, right, right. Yeah,
Like,
Warcraft's little brother, right? So it's quite
yeah.
a while.
Yeah, and then, speaking of Warcraft with like, just like World of Warcraft, specifically like dear God, there's just expansion packs and different different shit that you can buy and then you get into like the idea of pay like the microtransactions
Mhm.
and buying all of the shit instead of achieving all of it.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So
Well,
it's
so
like
and what's so interesting is, like, you've already pegged it. Like, the point of the video game for you and I, and for most people, is to get that achievement and the rewards that you feel when you get that achievement. So of course, if you buy that achievement, what the hell was the point of being there, right? But there's also a social aspect to gaming that didn't exist until relatively recently.
mhm.
That changes that up, right? So, like, my wife's game of choice and her obsession over the last year, it has been Animal Crossing on the Switch,
Yeah.
right? She has played the absolute hell out of that. I think she's now got, like, she's got an app on her phone where she's trying to make sure she has every single collectible item that you can possibly have in that game. I think that's something in the, like, like quintillions or something. It's ridiculous. But she's just been obsessed with it. And it's not, she's not looking for achievements. She's not trying to level up. She's socializing. She's
Mhm.
having fun hanging out with other people, crafting, making new things, showing those things off, getting new ideas from other friends, helping people who are new to the game they get their islands in order, etc. It's an entirely social thing for her. So I think, look, as video games become more and more to more people, you have this necessarily clash of cultures. So for people like you and I, for whom video games are primarily about accomplishment, the very idea of buying in all your good stuff,
Yeah.
it seems foreign to us. But for somebody for whom a video game is primarily a way to get together with his buddies afterwards, and so having the kick-ass sword is just like having the kick-ass shoes when I was in school, right? So whether he bought it or earned it, it doesn't matter. He has the kick-ass sword.
Yeah. It's like, I'm
Um,
just gonna look cool. It's like,
yeah,
I should
right.
earn it.
And
Yeah.
as much as I want to be derisive of that, I have to recognize that, like, video games are different things to different people. It's such a it's a term that's being asked to do so much work in today's universe. It means so many things. The fact that what my wife is doing when she's playing Animal Crossing and what I'm doing when I'm playing Hades or when I'm playing like Pistol Whip on the Oculus or something, the fact that those are being governed by the same term seems insane, right? There's such wildly different things that we're doing, but we call them video games and we act like this is a category that like completely makes sense, like, movies or something like that, but it is so much more than that at this point.
Yeah. And you have so many people that will just be so snotty and gatekeepy
Yes.
about their video games, and
Yep.
I'm the kind of person that, there's very few, very, very few things that I will gatekeep, very, very few, because I generally think, like, if you're gonna enjoy something, like, enjoy it. Like, somebody else's enjoyment is of literally no concern to you unless it's hurting someone else.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
so the idea that people will, look down on those who are like, "Oh, I'm not that good at video games," or, I play, Animal Crossing instead of playing something like fucking what's something that's come out recently? I don't
Cyberpunk
other I
27.
was gonna well, I was gonna say other than Cyberpunk, because apparently that had a whole bunch of issues.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
I heard that was such a clusterfuck, and there was a Twitch stream I was watching that was about, Cyberpunk and shit that happens in the video game industry, that happens with crunch,
Oh
and
yeah.
getting, trying to deliver this product, and they were sort of debating the merits of, do we delay the game and have it be more complete and have it be better, and, have it so you don't have to, roll out all of these updates and stuff, or do you just go ahead and get it out there and run the risk of having people be really pissed off?
Well,
Like,
I think, look, what happened is the consumer told them at a certain point, we'll forgive you. We'll ultimately forgive whatever fuck up you make during the rollout. So there are two schools of thought in that. One is that, like you said, that you get the game out as close to the date that you said you would get it out as possible, the date that makes most sense for you as a marketing or from a marketing perspective, that you get a mostly complete version. These games are so big, you're never going to get all the bugs anyway, so you're going to have to rely on the players to debug it to some degree. So might as well be this degree that makes you the most maximal profit. Get that process started right away, patch it. The early adopters might have some problems. Everybody else will have a great game experience, right? That's one philosophy. The other philosophy is called Nintendo, right? Like, that is the only goddamn company left that doesn't do that, in my experience.
yeah.
Nintendo, like, they're no doubt they patch their games the same as any other game company, but like, you're very unlikely to find problems in a Nintendo game when you're not going to see the next Legend of Zelda game or the next Mario game is not going to have a Cyberpunk 2077
Oh
to
god,
launch.
no. Yeah,
But
no.
unlike everybody else in the industry, Nintendo does not release launch dates, right? Well,
Mhm.
they do like a month and a half beforehand, but they don't come out like Project Red, the company that made Cyberpunk 2077. They came out with a release date and then they pushed it back. And then by the time they finally released it, people were pissed at them for having pushed it back so many times. And so no doubt there was a huge amount of pressure for them to get it out then, and especially get it out before the Christmas season was over.
Mhm.
But had they not been pressing this whole, like, because they've been hyping that game for 8-9 years at that point.
Oh yeah, they originally say, yeah, it's gonna be coming out, but in like 2012. Like, I
Yeah,
don't remember this like
no, it was
firsthand,
right.
but
So it was
like,
before Witcher came out, right? Because that was the same company that did Witcher 3. That was their big hit before this one, but they were already hyping Cyberpunk before Witcher 3 came out. And I think that was like 2013, 14?
I think
Maybe it's more
so.
recent than that. But yeah, but yeah, like, so for, at least the better part of a decade, they were hyping this one game, and they kept having this date as this artificially induced sort of Damocles. And look, I mean, I'm sympathetic to these companies. It costs so damn much money to make one of these big open world games, like, the Cyberpunk 2077 type game. It takes so many man hours to make that game happen, and so many people's careers are riding on the success of it, that it's hard to blame them. Especially, like, Nintendo has the deepest pockets. Like Nintendo and Sony, whatever, they can sit on a game for years and years and years, and eventually they'll come out with it and it'll be fine. But some essentially basically a one-hit wonder out of Poland, they don't have that luxury. They've got to get that game the hell out. So yeah, it's a really screwy industry when it comes to shit like that. But to kind of circle back to your point earlier about gatekeeping, I find that so interesting, because, like I said, I'm fascinated by video game history, but I don't think I really qualify as a gamer to the gatekeepy types. But it's funny to look back at just how far that goes. An interesting observation I made the other day. So 1980, right? So smack dab in the middle of the golden era of arcade games, the first golden era of video games. There were two. There's a number of noteworthy games that came out in 1980, but the two most noteworthy were Defender. Eugene Jarvis, former pinball great, spectacularly good game, way ahead of its time, much more complicated gameplay than most video games, most arcade games of the day, was derided at the time as being too complex, but was still super, super popular. Gamers, the hardcore gamers, absolutely loved it. The other, of course, is like, look, if you wanted to draw a symbol to represent the 1980s, he'd be the one you'd draw, Pac-Man.
Oh, of course, yeah.
One of the most iconic, if not the most iconic video game of all time. Both of those came out the same year. Pac-Man was designed to appeal to a broad audience. Specifically, it was designed to appeal to a female audience, but it was designed by a man. So he said, well, what do women enjoy doing? Eating. I'll make a game about eating, right?
That cannot be accurate. Please tell me that is not accurate.
He said that in numerous interviews, that was his thinking behind it. But what ended up happening is, unlike every other video game in the world, he had a cute character. He paid attention to color. He made it inviting. It wasn't like dark and dismal. There weren't aliens that were coming down at you that were going to get you no matter what, whatever. It was this fun kind of goofy game. When Pac-Man died, it was sort of a silly little moment. And that game did appeal to women. It appealed to kids. It appealed to a lot of people that traditional video games had not yet appealed to. So when it came came time for the industry to bestow awards on itself, as the video game industry has been wont to do since the very beginning, everybody in the industry ultimately ended up calling Defender the game of the year. Now, that's ridiculous. It's great a game as Defender is, and I just picked up an Atari copy of it the other day, and I'm very excited about it. It plays really well. The game does, not the Atari version, but the game still plays really well. It's still a ton of fun. But like, come on, give me a break. Pac-Man is one of the most iconic games of all time. You knew that at the time. It was by far the most popular video game in American history. It was everywhere. The marketing and merchandising for it was all over. There were songs. The Pac-Man Fever song, like, legitimately reached the Billboard top 20 charts. There were New York Times. Yeah, he had a whole album, or they had a whole album. Garcia and Buckner, was it? Anyway, so and here's a crazy one to me. There were 2 Pac-Man strategy guides on the New York Times bestseller list.
Why do you need 2?
Right? Yeah, you'd think one would be enough in that. No, but apparently there were competing strategies. And they were both making so and look, those were just the 2 that made the New York Times bestseller list. There were dozens that were being published at that time. That game was so spectacularly popular, but even by 1980, in an industry that was barely 8 years old, you already had gatekeepy hardcore gamers that were going, no, Pac-Man doesn't count because my girlfriend likes it. Right? Defender is a game that my little brother sucks at, but my little brother is as good as me at Pac-Man, and therefore that cannot be the best game of the year.
Yeah. Oh,
So
yeah.
now you can interpret it differently. You can say that Defender was pushing boundaries in a way that Pac-Man wasn't. Maze games weren't new, and it was much harder at the time to recognize that it was pushing boundaries in terms of its gender appeal, in terms of its color palette, in terms of its simplicity, in terms of the use of the video game, the first cutscenes in video games, or arguably the first cutscenes in video games. There was a lot of revolutionary shit in Pac-Man, but at the time it looked like, just a really cutesied up Disney-fied version of other games like Gotcha and stuff like that.
Right.
But I think it's undeniable that there was a certain amount of it that was just gatekeepy guys going like, no, this doesn't count because it appeals to everybody. It's like, the people who can't like the music anymore once everybody else starts liking it.
Oh, hipsters, yeah.
So the music got worse at some point. Come on.
It's like, I liked this before it was cool.
And now I don't. Okay.
I've said that before, but I still like the stuff that I like. So
yeah, right, exactly.
Like, there's a difference, and just the gatekeeping in general has just always made me so amazingly angry, and especially being a woman who really, really, really loves Star Wars. Like, there's so many people who are like, well, they pull the whole, oh, if you know so much, or if you love Star Wars so much, what's such and such and such and such? And I'm just like,
right. Why don't you ask me that? It's so funny because when you ask Star Wars questions, when I say I'm into Star Wars, they're like, yeah, of course you are. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's like, of course. And then me,
who, like, in my mind that you would be able to do better in the trivia than I would, just based on your Funko Pops alone.
Well, fuck, I hosted Star Wars trivia when I worked for Geeks Who Drink in Austin.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I wore a Jedi costume to host Star Wars trivia. Like, I have a Rebel Alliance tattoo.
Oh, nice.
Like, I don't understand.
No, but that's it. Right. Like, so I have a friend who is a magician, and she talks to me constantly about. She's told me, like, when she does close up magic, very often she has to, if she's doing for a man that's older than her, she'll add lines about how, like, oh yeah, no, it was she has to invent a man who taught her the trick. She'll say like, oh, my teacher, the great David such and such or whatever, the great man name taught me this trick or whatever. Otherwise they'll get upset because she fooled them and she's a woman. And she was telling me about it, going to a magic conference, and she's with a group of friends, and this famous magician is there to meet all of them. And of course, he's somebody that you and I would never have heard of, because who gives a shit? But like, it's somebody who magicians would recognize. And his first question to her, she looks at all the other guys. She's like, so which of these guys is your boyfriend? Who got you into this? Right. Like, and so, yeah. Like, so, but that's the thing though, is that gatekeep that attitude, it doesn't necessarily have to have a gender bias. It doesn't necessarily have to have a racial bias or a class bias, an education bias or whatever, but it's its own bias any damn way. Right? Like, it doesn't need that, because it is a bias all by itself. Now, the fact that it slots in so nicely with all these other biases should be a dead giveaway.
Yeah, but I feel like most of the time, if you have one bias, then you have numerous others.
Well, yeah, if you don't recognize the problem with the biases in the first place, right? Because we all have biases, right? But if you're acting on them without recognizing that they exist in any way, yeah,
exactly, yeah. So, oh boy, gatekeeping. Hate it.
Well, that's
so
what your cat's doing that right now. The cat is absolutely gatekeeping the audio input jack there.
So she don't fuck this up. She just a little bit ago, she like had her leg up and was like licking around a little butthole, and I'm just all like, this is a great look for you. It's a really great look for you. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you.
Snappy.
Yeah. But again, everybody who watches on a regular basis is just totally used to that.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, we're coming up at about an hour. Do you have any final thoughts? Any closing thoughts? Any final words?
Yeah, I know it has absolutely nothing to do with anything that we've been talking about up till now, but you should buy my book, Outbreak: A Crisis of Faith: How Religion Ruined Our Global Pandemic. It's available now as an ebook, or you can buy a physical copy from Amazon. Yes, I'm sorry, Amazon. It is an Amazon exclusive. There is nowhere else that you can get it. I know a lot of people don't like working with Amazon, and yeah, part of the reason is because like they lock down self-published authors to the point where like, yeah, I could put it on another site, but I'd make so goddamn much less money to sell 8 copies that it's just not worth it. That's one of the reasons you don't want to support them, and I understand that. Also, it should be out eventually on Audible, which is also Amazon, so you're fucked if that's what you were waiting on. But I'm having a ton of trouble. It's really hard to self-publish an audiobook, apparently. It's way hard. This is the first time I've had to do that. So a lot more hoops than I was expecting here at the back end, and everything takes forever because you have to have a human actually listen to the entire damn thing to get approval on everything. So
Yeah.
apologies if you've been waiting on that, but that should be available soon.
Yeah, and that's actually one thing I forgot to put a link to, so I will amend the description and put the link to get that on Amazon. I don't know how I forgot to put that in there because I had actually pre-ordered it on Kindle.
Oh,
whenever,
right on.
whenever it was announced and everything. I still need to read it, but I'm really bad about reading. So,
Hey, honestly, if you buy it, I don't give a rat's ass.
like, I don't give a shit.
I mean, once you bought it, hey,
Well, I read,
tell other people that you enjoyed it by all means, but you don't actually.
yeah,
have to.
leave it 5 stars.
Same for me, one way or the other.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, but like, hey, I completely forgive you. I have 5 podcasts at this point. So, like, if you forgot to put one of the things in the description, I completely forgive you.
Yeah, because I was like, okay, I've got this and this and this and this and this. Twitter, like, doing all this stuff. I'm like, oh, this is the one thing I forgot. Damn it. All right. Well, so speaking of 5 podcasts, where can people, as if people don't already know, where can people find you and support you?
Well, you can check me out on The Scathing Atheist, God Awful Movies, The Skeptocrat, D&D Minus, and Citation Needed. And you can support us on Patreon for any of those projects, really. And also follow at PIAT Pod on Twitter if you kind of want to keep up to date on all the stuff we do. That's sort of our one-stop shop if you want to just, if you don't want to follow all of our shows.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, Tim is fantastic and wonderful and
Tim is social media fucking best. I honestly, awesome. So just very quick. I know we're right at the hour there, but I want to brag on Tim real quick because I told the guys when we first started talking about maybe bringing on somebody to do social media, I was like, well, I got a friend on social media and he's the funniest guy on Facebook. He's always got the funniest things to say. He's a great guy. I've met him before at a conference. He's a super, super nice guy. He's got a handicap that makes it hard for him to get other employment. So I really wanted to give him this job to begin with. I told him, I was like, but here's the problem. If he sucks at it, I'm not going to be able to fire him. I like him too much. Right? So one of you guys has to commit to firing him. If things don't work out, somebody else has to do that. I can't be that guy. I'll go in to fire him and end up giving him a fucking raise. Right.
Right.
And
he's such a good dude.
Yeah, right. And so, but everybody was just like, okay, like eventually we threw that on Andrew because Andrew's the lawyer, he's the guy who ends up with that job all the time. But luckily, as it turned out, that's the furthest thing from our minds. And Tim turned out to be like one of the greatest things that ever happened to our company. He's just a phenomenal guy.
He's awesome.
And honestly, like we will never be able to pay him what he's worth.
He's Tim. I'm wanting to say I'd already been Facebook friends with Tim before he started doing this stuff for y'all, but I don't know because I've got a lot of Facebook friends, and I don't entirely recall when I become friends with people.
It probably was. I think he was maxed out on Facebook friends by the time we brought him on. So, like, I think pretty much all of his Facebook friends were, there from beforehand.
Right. Yeah.
He was just a funny guy. He's
good people. And honestly, like, y'all have just sort of such the what's the word I'm looking for? There's a specific word I'm looking for that I can't think of, but y'all just have such like a magical thing going. Y'all really, really do. And it seems really silly, but so I don't think I've ever told you this. A friend of mine actually had told me about god awful movies like 5 years ago. So it was before, it was right around the time Eli had gotten married, was when I think the first episode I listened to, like, Eli wasn't there because he had just gotten married.
Oh, right on, right on.
And I was just all like, I don't know who this person is. I don't know who any of these people are, but this is really funny. So I'm just going to keep listening to it. So, yeah. And, then it just sort of snowballed from there. So, anyway. Awesome. Well, that's going to do it for us today. Noah, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me.
It's been an absolute blast, and happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. For anybody who doesn't know, my birthday's on Monday. Yay. You fucking cat. Really?
She says, it just occurred to me nobody's seen my asshole yet.
Exactly. Just gotta get up there and show my butt. There you go. All right. Well, thank y'all so much for watching. Thank y'all so much for being here. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. We're Divine Disbelief. You can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/Divine Disbelief. And we will see y'all next time.